Welcome to How Things Connect, where we share insight and wisdom on healing, empowerment, and regeneration. I'm your host, Stephanie Wang, founder and CEO of Ka and Pathogenics. I'm so delighted and honored to have as my guest today genius doctor, innovative scientist, researcher, and inventor, Dr. Todd Ovokaitys. Dr. Todd was first in his class in high school and at Northwestern University, and was accepted only after 2 years of college to the premier program at Johns Hopkins Medical School. He then did further training at Georgetown in internal medicine and pulmonary and intensive care medicine. He's become a leader in laser biophysics research and has developed a stem cell protocol that has reversed biological age at the DNA level more than any other method in medical history. He's been granted multiple patents in stem cells, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, and even agriculture. He also composes choral and instrumental symphonic pieces, the transcendental choirs he's created and produced all around the world, with up to 900 plus choristers, rejuvenate the body while immensely boosting personal vibrational and awareness states. The combination of the biomedical and esoteric reflect his passion for the full exploration and expansion of the human potential. Welcome, Dr. Todd. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Awesome to see
Yeah,
you today.
awesome to have you here with us. Your contribution to the science of aging, advanced nutrition, solving issues of human disease, as well as human consciousness have been enormous. Would you tell us a little bit about your personal story and how you ended up being who you are?
Sure. Happy to do that. While I was in my 10 years of medical training, I was also involved deeply in spirituality. I was, you could say, a Sufi ascetic training with a master in that tradition. So the fabric of understanding consciousness, our purpose for being here, and dynamics of external and internal evolution and involution were all part of the fabric of my training experience while doing the usual path of medical training at high caliber institutions. The insight that gave rise to everything I'm doing today was while I was doing my training in pulmonary and intensive care. And one of the things that we do as pulmonologists is a type of procedure called a bronchoscopy, where we actually pass a small tube into the lungs. It's a little bit weird. It goes through the nose, through the vocal cords, and then down into the various segments of the lung. And I was doing a lot of those procedures for persons with AIDS and pneumonia, because a person with AIDS, unlike other people with pneumonia that just have, say, a single organism, may have 5 different things going on, all at the same time. There can be opportunistic infections, there can be malignancy, there can be various types of bacterial infections. A whole host of things can happen. So you actually have to do an invasive procedure where you do a biopsy of the lung and also do washings of the lung. And while I was doing those procedures and the drugs were coming out to treat them, I realized that the drugs were working at a fundamental level of biochemistry and would tend to be intrinsically toxic, and they certainly were. And that's still a big issue with the so-called antiretrovirals used for that condition. And the insight really went back to fundamental physics. And one of the things that I really found inspiring when I studied physics was this concept of fundamental frequency, that every structure, from atomic vibrational levels to a crystal wine glass to a skyscraper to a bridge across a gap over the water, has something called a natural frequency, which is the frequency at which it will vibrate if you give it a stimulus. And that gets into the concept of resonance, where if you provide an input of energy at that natural frequency, the energy will build in the system. It's the concept of resonance. Putting in energy at the natural frequency will build an energy in the system, and it can build to a point that there is more energy to do what you want the system to do, so you can make biochemistry more active and more functional by doing that, which is part of the work that we ultimately have done. Or you can put so much energy in that the system simply shatters like a crystal wine glass when an opera singer hits the right note. And there was an insight, which was that somehow the structure of the nucleic acid in the virus was somehow different than the structure of the genetic code in human cells. And if there is a structural difference or a geometric difference in this concept of natural frequency, there would be a differential frequency. And the idea was if we could figure out that frequency, we could apply it and we could neutralize HIV without the need for any drug intervention whatsoever. So that was the insight. And those structural differences weren't even known at that point, but ultimately it was discovered that the virus has four regions called stem loops where it's different from the typical double helix of nucleic acid. And actually, HIV is RNA, not DNA. It's a so-called retrovirus where it does something called reverse transcription. It converts its RNA code to a DNA code through an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And that said, it's still nucleic acid in a configuration, and the stem loops have open loops, so there is a definite structural difference. And along the way, I had a vision where I communicated in that experience with what you could call the pure consciousness of DNA. And the information from DNA is that the understanding of science about DNA is correct but incomplete. You could consider the human genome as an encyclopedia of the information to build the tens of thousands of proteins that are required to create a human organism, which parallels other types of organisms, of course. And in addition to that, there's something else that's profound and generally overlooked scientifically, which is that at the cellular level, DNA is more than just a double helix. DNA does something called supercoiling. So the double helix is a type of string, but then that loops into a supercoil. And that supercoil can make an even bigger supercoil. And there are up to 7 levels of supercoiling in how the basically 6 feet of DNA code fits into a teeny tiny nucleus that's only a micron or 1 millionth of a meter wide. Or in other terms that make more sense, it's a thousandth of a millimeter, pretty teeny tiny. And the message was that DNA is also a conducting molecule. Now, based on its chemistry, you would think that DNA would be an insulator, it would block electrical flow. But more recent work has shown that the core of DNA is like a room temperature superconductor. So it's a conductive medium. And in a cell, you have different types of charges that are moving through the system. So you have a supercoiled, superconducting system in an environment of moving charges. And the basic message was that DNA functions like a radio. It can transmit and receive electromagnetic information, just like you have a radio transmitter and receiver, you have something similar in DNA. And the core instruction, or at least invitation, was that if we could learn the types of vibrational frequencies that DNA makes in states of health and disease, that we could literally learn how to instruct a sick cell to become healthy or an old cell to become young. And that gave rise to studying a lot of core information of work that isn't generally well known, of the use of electromagnetic frequency for various therapeutic applications. And finally, particularly through the work of a former NASA systems scientist, that it was possible to create a new type of laser technology that generates a new type of waveform configuration that is able to modulate frequency signals to communicate with DNA to create the effects that were described, to make a sick cell healthy or an old cell young. And we took that further with experiments at USC with one of the original co-authors of the HIV discovery paper in America, who was working with Dr. Gallo at the NIH. And in those experiments, we learned that the carrier wave signal of this new type of waveform just of itself was able to inhibit the production of HIV by 80%. And then when we modulated more complex signals based upon modeling that unique part of the genome of HIV with the stem loops, that we were able in the test tube to inhibit viral production to below the limits of detectability. So in essence,
Mm.
we were reducing viral load to zero at the test tube level, just with pure vibrational frequency and no chemistry whatsoever. So we had validation of the principle, and the work that led up to that discovery, and this is something that could still be developed further as another adjunct to addressing HIV, particularly in resistant cases, is when we wanted to make a prototype of a system to create this new type of waveform, where we actually align the waves out of phase to create something called a vector sum zero wave. So if two waves are aligned in what would be called a 180-degree phase shift, because 60 degrees is a full cycle, when you add them together, they exactly cancel the electric and magnetic fields, which gives it an entirely new property, one of which is the ability to go much deeper through the body. Because typical visible light only goes anywhere from 2 to 5 millimeters through tissue, about 2 millimeters at the blue-violet end and about 5 millimeters at the red end. So by creating this waveform, we also had a way we could give a directional vibrational signal, an information signal, a frequency signature deep into the body, and this part of the waveform where you have this vector sum zero with no net electric or magnetic field probably goes all the way through the body from one side to the other. So we found, for example, with this new energy, if we apply it through the skin to someone's brain, if they're sensitive, they actually feel something going all the way through their brain. The interesting part, if you put someone next to them, uh, they can all feel the wave going through the other person's brain into their brain. And the difference is, if it's just the laser, they feel it one way. If it goes to someone else's brain, they feel fluctuations, which we believe are the modulation of the other person's brain waves onto the laser that's transmitting information from one brain to the other.
Wow. Hmm.
So because it was very expensive to build a system at the higher frequency required to be relevant to HIV, we built a system at a lower frequency in the red that was basically just to show proof of principle of creating this new waveform. And just as an experiment with a colleague of mine at the NIH, who was a specialist in bone marrow transplantation, we had blood forming cells from the bone marrow. And these have stem cell-like characteristics, particularly of something called the hematopoietic stem cell, which is a stem cell that makes the various blood-forming elements. And what we found when we passed the beam through a flask of cells, not having any particular expectation, we just expected or hoped that we would see something.
Hmm.
24 hours later, the cells lined up visibly where the beam had been. So many cells had gathered together that you could actually see it with the naked eye. My colleague said these cells may gather 8 to 16 cells together, but she felt there were 1 to 2 million cells that had lined up in a visible strand where the beam had been.
It's
So that was
incredible.
our, you're right. So that was our first eureka moment, the ability to actually direct the localization of cells in an efficient way where the cells also adhere to each other. And then we did further biochemical research on that and found that we were actually upregulating, increasing the cell's expression of so-called cell adhesion molecules that are like cellular Velcro, where the little hooks actually keep the cells together, called integrins because they maintain the integrity of tissue. And what we found was that there was an up to 40 to 100% upregulation of the physical expression of cell adhesion molecules. And cell adhesion is not just involved in the cells sticking together so that the tissue doesn't fall apart, they're also involved in cell-to-cell communication. So that first experiment, which was literally just throwing something against the wall and hoping it would stick, gave us a eureka moment of this could be a way to direct stem cells where they need to go in the body for any location in the body because the beam goes so much more deeply. And that is the origin of the work we're now doing with both the activation and guidance of stem cells that is having profound age reversal effects, not just anti-aging, but turning the clock backwards.
Mhm. Wow, that's thank you for sharing your journey and how incredible, what incredible innovations and breakthroughs that you've had with this technology. I think the invention of your initial laser, was it called the Chi laser?
And that's what we call it now.
That's what you call
And
it now. Mhm.
and chi or ki, as you know, in Eastern medical systems, you have something called chi or ki or life force. And it can
Mhm.
be spelled in various ways. It's usually spelled chi for chi, but can also be spelled in some languages qi. One element is that we believe we are enhancing the vibrational states of molecules and increasing the so-called life force of the system. And in our context, QI also stands for quantum information. So you
Mhm.
could say that the Chi laser or the key laser, because it's also a key to unlocking biological codes, is the use of quantum information to enhance the life force in a system.
Mhm. Amazing. When you were talking about the ability to line up stem cells and through the vector sum zero, I mean, if you can actually reverse aging, that has so many implications aside from the obvious ones. Immediately, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about Alzheimer's. I was thinking about mental deterioration for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been working with patients on that side of things as well with this technology?
Well, what do you think?
Yes.
So, what we can say based upon where we are in our regulatory status is that what we're doing is high level regenerative medicine.
Hmm.
And in general, if you reverse the biologic age of a tissue, you bring back functions.
Hmm.
So we've had great success, particularly with a wide range of neurologic issues. And we published the best results in history for improving cardiac function when the heart is failing. And we also get great results with the regeneration of joints that the hallmark really is reversing biologic age at the DNA level.
Hmm.
And when you do that, systems tend to improve. And the beauty of the system is that another huge discovery that is probably landmark in the stem cell world is the ability to awaken from dormancy this very unique type of stem cell that is formed early in gestation and is pluripotent. And by that, it means that it can become any of the three primary germ layers, which means it can become any of the hundreds of types of cells in the body. And depending upon the environment that you put it,
Hmm.
based upon the localized microchemistry of a tissue and the cell to cell communication,
Hmm.
that these cells can actually become new cells and rebuild the tissue. And the difference is that for unknown reasons, this type of cell goes into hibernation at or around the time that we're born. So
Hmm.
while all the other cells and tissues of the body are aging, this basically remains inert at a very young level, um, probably close to the newborn level. So no matter how old someone is, these cells are biologically much younger than they are.
Hmm.
So that when we do a treatment, we just need to draw a modest number of tubes of blood, about 6 tubes, not really much more than if you were just getting routine blood testing. And then from that, we've learned how to separate, concentrate, and awaken the dormant cells using the same laser technology. And we've actually published that basic science work showing that our methodology is optimum, the way we apply the laser to awaken the cells. And literally within 30 minutes of doing that process, the number of these cells that are countable is already 2.5 times greater.
Wow. Hmm.
So the cell number is measurably increased, and we actually wrote a theoretical biophysics paper what we think is happening, which is we believe that through resonance we are removing a blocking protein from a major receptor and adhesion molecule in the stem cells. And by removing that blocking protein, the antibodies used to measure them are more readily able to bind and count them. So we don't think that we're more than doubling the cells immediately. We think we're just making them 2.5 more times countable, but we also make them biologically active. And then when we give the cells intravenously, the cells are small enough, unlike other types of stem cells, to get through the lung. And then depending upon that person and their priorities, we then have a 20 to 30-minute laser guidance process to increase the likelihood. It's like a quantum concept. We increase the probability that a stem cell goes in the three-dimensional volume of tissue where that person most needs them.
So interesting. I mean, there's so many implications. I'm also curious
Yes,
as
there
I'm
are.
I mean, it's insane, right? This is so huge. Have you gotten pushback from like medical establishment, pharmaceutical industry,
Not as
anything
yet.
like that? Hmm.
I mean, we base everything that we're doing on sound basic science and biophysics,
Hmm.
and we let the data speak for itself. So thus far, we haven't been challenged on what we're doing scientifically. And other than, say, this
Well, good for
podcast
you.
with you, uh, we really have not been that public about it.
Hmm.
And we have been doing a lot of protocols and procedures at our clinic where we're defining the types of regenerative effects that we can see. So imagine that a degenerative dysfunction in any system, if you give brand new stem cells that are also much younger biologically, that the system can function better, whether it's
Absolutely.
neurological connections, cardiac function, the action in joints, or any other tissue where we would direct the cells. And when we give the cells systemically, the two main attractor fields that help to direct the cells are either what we call the laser guidance signal in the 20 to 30-minute typically uh, laser guidance protocol, that wherever there's inflammation, the cells are attracted to go as well. And then the cells that aren't attracted to either of those go
Hmm.
throughout the body from head to toe. So there's a head to toe age reversal effect that's
Wow.
emphasized where the person can most use a regenerative effect. When we did the biologic age testing, and this began early in 2021, the lab that was testing called us and said that our results in terms of age reversal were orders of magnitude better than any they'd seen anywhere. And at first, the results were so far off the charts that they thought they'd done the test wrong and had to repeat it several times to make sure that it was accurate. And what we saw, even before we had before and after testing, was that if someone had had one treatment in the past 5 years, that they were 3 years younger biologically than their birth date age. If they'd had 2 treatments, they were 6 years younger, and with 4 treatments, they were 12 years younger. And there's not
Mm.
any other published work showing a greater than 10-year biological age reversal. Now, with repeated treatments over the past year and a half, we have an enlarging group of people that's 12 to 18 years younger biologically than their birth date age, and the improvement in their actual physical function and results correlates with the reversal of biological age.
Do they also look a lot younger in a way that correlates with how their organs and bodily functions are?
The skin can tighten and brighten, hair can regrow and darken, things that we
Wow,
associate with it. Muscles grow more readily, the response to workouts is greater. Maximum heart rate goes up, suggesting a younger physiologic age of the heart. We had one uh, person who is an older triathlete who, within 2 weeks of the procedure, his maximum heart rate was 12 years younger. It was
incredible.
actually that of a person roughly half his chronological age.
I'm curious also whether you've done treatments for, let's say, women who are postmenopausal. Does it actually bring fertility back?
Our most dramatic case
I had to ask that question.
was a woman 15 years post-menopause who 1 month later began having ovulation system symptoms. And she then started having menstrual periods, and it was so like what she experienced before. At one point, she even got a pregnancy test kit, although I think she was relieved that she
Goodness.
wasn't actually pregnant. And while we can't talk about the work yet because we're just starting, we're
Hmm.
now working with one of the world's leading authorities in fertility and looking at ways that we can deliver the cells to have enhanced fertility effects. And we expect that we'll see them.
Yeah, this is mind-blowing innovation in technology and science. And I mean, the more you think about it, it's almost saying theoretically we could live forever
Yes,
with this technology
in theory, yes.
in theory. And I'm
We'll
also
have to wait like hundreds of years to be
100 years.
sure.
But it's so interesting because it's, corresponding to time on the planet now where we're facing so many crises in terms of our own existence and
Agreed.
nature and everything. And I wonder, I mean, with this technology, you've been testing with humans, but I mean, I would imagine this is something that also would correspond for animals, for plants, for other creatures that are part of
Uh,
our world.
we've had a veterinary experience and have done dozens of cases, and
Hmm.
age reversal effects occur equally well in pets as people.
That is incredible. I wonder, because we talk a lot about, you were talking about DNA earlier, and I wonder what the implications are also for human consciousness and evolution, because you have now the ability to awaken the life force in DNA. And we have a whole lot of so-called junk DNA, which isn't at all junk. It's just that most mainstream science hasn't quite figured out what it's for. And I'm curious if you've come into new discoveries about that as
Hmm.
well.
Well, it's all connected. And I'd say that our greatest passion goes beyond rejuvenation and life extension and healthy, youthful bodies of ever increasing fitness and cognitive capacity and creativity. It really goes into the concept of exploring the full realm of the human potential.
Hmm.
And the usual result of one of these protocols, where we give an infusion of cells that are much younger biologically than the person has aged to, is to reverse biologic age at the DNA level by 3 years. So the simple concept is that if you did this roughly every 3 years, you could be functionally ageless. Further, if one did treatments more frequently, you can reverse age and decide the age you want to reverse it to. And the idea with respect to human consciousness is if you've been given 3 years to relive biologically, what do you do with those 3 years? And imagine
Mm-hmm.
if the person decided they were actually going to do the disciplines that enhance consciousness. And there are lots of practices: yoga, meditation, qigong, uh, more advanced systems that anyone can do that will enhance their supersensory capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that I've done recently called Vibravision that in a series of 3 5-day intensives increases your ability to do things like see blindfolded, to accurately walk through a field of poles without hitting them because you can feel the empty space, to find objects blindfolded at levels much, much higher than chance. At the highest level, people using that method can read blindfolded.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many methods where if a person uses those 3 years and actually does them with intention, they can be highly enhanced versions of themselves after that 3 years, and that can be repeated and repeated. So, in a sense, there's no limit to how much a person can expand and grow and be enhanced in their consciousness and their different types of abilities that become available to us when we do the work. I mean, the the ability to do
Yeah.
things isn't just a function of saying I want to do something that would be considered super normal. It's generally there are people who have mastered that arena and are willing to teach it, and it requires whatever the discipline is of that. So there are many, many ways to enhance brainwave states, consciousness, supersensory abilities, and even in the physical domain. So I'm about to start a 10-day training cycle with a 3-time world champion bodybuilder who is an artisan of how to sculpt and reshape the body. So I did 2 weeks with him recently, a few months ago, and in just 2 weeks of training, I increased muscle quality by 50% and reduced total body fat by 25 to 30%, getting to about a 9% level, which is in the realm of doing bodybuilding competitions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even just consciousness, everything fits together: body, mind, emotions, and being.
Mm-hmm.
All aspects of that can be addressed. There's a methodology we call biological decoding that has mapped the specific unresolved unconscious emotional conflicts that correlate with a condition in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And when you know the specific unresolved conflict, you can go through a process and ask the right questions in the right way, or do certain processes like rescripting the timeline, where one can become consciously aware of them, release the unresolved emotion, and literally reconnect parts of the brain that have been disconnected, and also improve biological function by getting to the core emotional conflict where the lack of resolution results in the brain doing what it can with the cells of the body to create what's called the special solution of survival. So there are many techniques that can be used. And one of the most important really is what I would call the various emotional release techniques. Because if someone has an unresolved unconscious conflict, that is going to be a limitation that will ride them the rest of their lives until they figure out a way to be free of it.
It's really, really heartening to hear that you're also accompanying all these physical sort of rejuvenation avenues together with something that can offer people guidance as to how they can match that with a greater level of awareness and consciousness. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to us to choose, right? Okay, so we have a longer life, or we have a rejuvenated life. What are we going to do with that time? What are we going to do with that space? And you mentioned recently when you spoke in Paris at Women in Tech how with the ongoing stem cell treatment discoveries, we're finding ways to live longer and become younger and healthier. But how do we want to live this new life and this new long life? That becomes, in a way, much more central because you don't have the no longer have the physical limitations. That question comes into the center a lot more. And have you, I'm curious, in your work, have you, I know you yourself with the study of Sufism and your own practices, but have you seen that happen in people who you've been treating?
That's an excellent question. And one of the phrases I coined recently, I was speaking at Dave Asprey's biohacking event, is the biohack is the stack.
Mm-hmm,
So if we're talking about profound age reversal, as far as what's been shown in a diagnostic way, looking at the human biological aging clock, the work with stem cells reverses aging more than anything in history, but it works even better if you stack it with other things. So we have one of our colleagues who is a leading authority in the regenerative medicine space who did two of our treatments plus plasma exchange plus a formula for enhancing telomere length.
mm-hmm,
And in just 6 months, he reversed his biologic age by 10 years at the DNA um, level with the so-called epigenetic aging clock. And as you know, the other aging clock is telomeres, and those were
mm-hmm,
14 years younger biologically. And that just happened in half a year. So the biohack is the stack. And the stack is across the spectrum. It's the physical, biological, biochemical, it's the psycho-emotional, it's the mental, and it's also getting to the spiritual vibrations. So any modality across that spectrum is part of what we consider the stack. And it depends upon the person, what they're ready to pursue. Not everyone's ready to look deep into their psyche for the emotional origins of the
right.
things going on with them. But even just being improved physically makes people more available to do
Mm-hmm,
more pieces at
absolutely.
once. And I would say for us, the overriding factor is the question, are you up leveling?
Mm-hmm,
And that's sort of the guidepost if you are on a good course. Can you look over the past 6 months or a year and saying that you've up leveled physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually? And in our perspective, if you take out the factor of your time is limited because your biological clock is ticking and you only have so much time left, and then there's also being subject to the body wearing out, if the body is not wearing out and you have more time, then you can choose to up level in every area of your life all the time.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I would argue also to say that, some people choose to do exactly the opposite. Now that
Yeah.
they have those years and have experienced profound age reversal, but they don't necessarily or not necessarily at a particular conscious level and are actually more interested in perpetuating a lot of the old models of existence and old paradigms, whether they be exploitation of some form or something that is not regenerative for the human race, but actually a little bit destructive. That's possible too, no?
That's really an excellent question because we still have the role of personal choice.
Right.
And there are those that are all in with the concept of exploring their full potential. And there are people that are stuck with holding on to the old way of things because that's their choice, it's comfortable, whatever the reasons are for making that decision. And it's always a personal choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's the free will concept. Yet it seems that those that are drawn to what we do are really those that are interested more in the pursuit of their human potential, at least of their increased wellness and biological robustness, than living longer so that they can continue practices that may be good for themselves, but not necessarily good for everyone and everything around them. I think you raise a good point. Like, would we want to extend the life of someone who is basically destructive? And well, it's not our preference, actually.
Oh, I mean, it's a dilemma, right? And but then, you know, I guess as a doctor,
And there's
you know,
another aspect. The no, good, yeah, good,
do
good,
no,
keep the
I
statement.
mean, the idea of do no harm, right? And that foundational philosophy in, being a physician, and also I don't know. I don't think it's our place to judge necessarily because you're offering it for you cannot. It's really hard to say, hey, we're offering this for some people, not others.
Mhm.
And I wonder though whether this is actually an issue that kind of would self-rectify in a sense, because if you are as you are awakening our DNA, and if you are in the belief that there is a trajectory for human evolution. And sure, you could stay where you are or devolve, but really the where the impetus is really towards an evolutionary higher frequency in light. And if that's the case, hopefully that will still override. That's my hope at least. And I'm fascinated because, as you said, it's not just looking at the physical, it's looking at the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. All of it is part of our DNA and what our human inheritance is, right? And do we how do we steer that forward? So I wonder also, as you're sharing everything that you're sharing, I feel that you are a huge part of actually helping and accelerating human evolution as we sort of become a new human in a way.
Mhm.
I mean, we're going there, right? And there's I mean, I wouldn't call it a mutation, but in a way, it is, now we're going into sci-fi territory, but in a way, you're engineering a new human.
That is a very interesting point. And as a counterbalance to the question of what if people that are more win-lose in their orientation are given the ability to live longer and continue to live in a way that may be less than ideal for others, I believe you are correct in that when we do these procedures, we create an entire environment. We create a musical vibrational environment, we create a thought frequency environment, we create a technical, medical, biophysical environment, and we also create a psycho-emotional intentional environment where people can overcome the limitations
Mm-hmm.
from their own lifetime and that which they inherit from their ancestors. Thus, as you surmise, and I agree with it, and maybe someday we'll have vibrational metrics so we can actually measure the vibration of a person and see if their vibration has increased. I mean, there is a method, if you've read Power versus Force by Dr. Stephen Hawkins, where he suggests there's a calibrated scale of human consciousness. And you can use muscle testing or applied kinesiology to actually calibrate a person or even a book that we may find that, and I believe it will be the case as I'm testing it right now, that just getting one of these age reversal methods in the environment in which it is offered, and we can talk a bit about vibrational modes of enhancing awareness as well, that we embody in something called the pineal tones,
Mm-hmm.
that the experience itself will tend to create a a boost in awareness, a boost in overall function. And
Mm-hmm.
if someone gets a boost like that, that may soften the edges and create a little more introspection and may shift their orientation. So they may tend to become more aware, more compassionate, more thoughtful.
Hmm.
So there can be, as you say, a self-mitigating mechanism that if someone is pursuing the course of extreme life extension, that some degree of awareness enhancement comes with it. So there can be a general evolutionary push in a direction that we're looking for. And it's even as far as I've really not shared this before, and there isn't a way to validate a statement like this. One of the aware persons that was witnessing a procedure, and we look at the vitality field around the cells before the laser awakening, and the field is pretty strong. It's about of 10 to 12 inches from the container of cells. And after the laser, it can go out to 9 to 12 feet. And
Wow.
so that's at least in one method of interpretation enhancement of the life force or the chi in the system that will then be enhancing the vitality and youthfulness of the person who receives that preparation, that he made the comment that he actually saw there being a new type of human, that there would be those that are stuck in the old system and those that get a method like this, which creates a transformational process that goes beyond just reversing the aging clock.
Fascinating. And I'm glad you, and I hope you're continually tracking that side of things as well, besides just the physiological, biological functions of
Mm-hmm.
someone who is experiencing profound age reversal. I think it's really, really important. And how available are these treatments to the public right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a clinic in Carlsbad, and I'll give you a landing page where people can get more information about
Hmm.
that.
That'd be great.
And the other things that we do, we create laser enhanced supplements, which are high vibrational.
Hmm.
And we particularly focus on regeneration and enhancing all the functions of the brain and other body systems as well. That's called gematria. And
Hmm.
we've got controlled clinical trials on a dozen of the products. We also validate them scientifically. Then there is mind body logic, which is the psycho-emotional medicine to actually learn the techniques of understanding the psycho-emotional landscape and what the different conflict is between an issue with the shoulder versus the elbow versus the knee versus an internal organ, for example, and how to do the decoding process. And then ultimately, there's pineal tones, which is really into the realm of higher consciousness, which are a series of ancient and future tonal patterns that a person can do on their own for profound effects. And we gather large choirs on high energy points of the planet and have as many as over 900 choristers that
Hmm.
are singing these patterns, usually in pairs, that create incredible overtones and harmonics, which also we believe speak to the DNA, both the physical and the supraphysical, that we have seen some profound healings that you could just say happen to coincide in time. And even more, we see an enhancement of awareness. If you look at the Hawkins scale, he has a system that goes from zero, which is dead, or one, which is just barely alive, to 1,000, which he says is the consciousness of an enlightened being like a Jesus or a Buddha. And a 5 point increase in that exponential scale would be the product of a lifetime of work. Yet, with a large group of people singing these tones in an intentional way, we typically see an 80 to 100 point increase in calibration in a 3 day process.
Wow. And we can actually practice this um, by ourselves, not just in a group of 900 plus choristers.
I've recently created a series of training videos. I believe it's about 7 hours altogether.
Hmm.
It gives the origin and background and shares the 36 different patterns that have been created that then become the substance of what people sing in the choir. So just doing the training videos imparts significant vibrational information and enhancement. So that would prepare one to actually be in a choir with lots of people
Mm.
and you get the amplification of the intention of all the people in the group. Yet just practicing the tones on their own, just doing the training video has profound effects. One of the most interesting is that we work with and have actually recruited this incredibly young woman named Tiffany, who, for medical reasons, had both her eyes replaced with prosthetics. So she's blind in a way that she has no actual physical eyes. I mean, some people are legally blind, but they can see a little bit. Well, she doesn't even have the eyes to see. Yes, she does a method called vibravision, which allows her to create an internal screen where she can see the world. So people that see her don't even realize that she's blind. And
Wow.
when she worked with the training tapes, she got to level 8, and she went from seeing the world grayscale to seeing an accurate color for the first time.
My goodness. How incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty
Oh
cool.
my God.
She's an
Yeah.
amazing person. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You just returned from the November 11th, 11/11 choir in Cancun. That's part of pineal tones,
Hmm.
which you just explained is a system of sounds based on ancient ways of knowing that are designed to assist with human balance, health, and expansion of awareness. Where I think you have one last one because you've been timing this, right,
Hmm. Right.
over many years and strategically in particular geographical locations.
Hmm.
And could you tell us a little bit about that and where the next one is going to be and why?
Well, the 12th choir of 12 we've done thus far is going to be on the island of Maui,
Mhm.
where it said this was last performed 26,000 years ago in the last galactic cycle. So it's literally a return to what was done in ancient times in that same location. It's where the first choir was, and it'll be the where the final choir of the series will be. It'll be the 12th choir, and the date will be 12/12/24.
12, 12, 24. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do the training
Uh-huh.
and so that I pass and, get qualified to be in that choir.
Mm-hmm.
That's the plan. I'm
Yeah.
there.
Love to see you there.
Yeah.
We
And go ahead.
Yeah, we expect over 1,000 choristers. We expect it to be the biggest one yet.
Wow. In Maui. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Amazing. And
And it's whale season. So you can dive
oh
in the
yeah.
water and literally hear the symphony of the whales at that time.
They'll probably be singing along.
Uh, well, in the first choir, one of the things that I do personally at the choirs is something called whale tones, creating the vibrational patterns of the song of the whales. And people that went out on the boat after the choir said that the whales changed their song to match what we were doing from the choir.
Extraordinary. Your work is so, I mean, is beyond revolutionary and it's just beginning in many ways. There's so many more amazing breakthroughs to be had. And I'm glad, glad to hear it's actually available for people. I don't know price point wise how accessible it is, but hopefully, I don't know if you have any plans for people who maybe in the future maybe cannot, because I think it's like $10,000 for each treatment
Right,
at the moment.
right. And depending upon the circumstances, we work with people to make it affordable. Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, it's our goal to get it to as many people as possible.
Hmm.
And people just need to let us know their circumstances, and we aim to make it available. And also, we have licensed other clinics around the country. Uh, in general, I'd say it's best to go where it all began because we have the most experience with it and we're the ones that developed it.
Where are you located again?
We're in San Diego,
In San Diego.
right
Hmm.
in the county of San Diego, in beautiful Carlsbad. Not that far from the ocean, actually.
Hmm.
And we're across from the flower fields, which come into full bloom in springtime, which is rather spectacular. And we have a number of other locations with top practitioners in the country that have different levels and focus of expertise. So there could be someone with an issue where someone else is even more experienced with that particular kind of issue. So if they call us and speak to Tiffany or Allie, that they can define and decide whether our location is best or another might be even better or more convenient for them. And
Right.
those that can afford to pay the full price, and if you really look at it, imagine spending $9 a day to relive biologically the last 3 years of your life.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way of looking at it.
What's the value of that?
Yeah,
It's,
totally. Totally. And since this show is how things connect, we're also very interested in making the connections between, for example, if you think there's a connection, or if you can imagine a connection between regenerative health, the ability for us to continually rejuvenate ourselves and reverse the aging process, and a regenerative planet and a way of living that isn't self-destructive. I don't know if you've been thinking along those lines as well, because you did mention that you have some patents for agriculture, and I was just wondering, is that tied together?
we have patents in agriculture showing that if we use this process to enhance the vibration and energy of the nutrients, that, for example, this very elegant biodynamic formula that's used as a foliar that you simply spray on the leaves and stems 4 times during the growing cycle will increase the yield of non-GMO beans by 20%. And everything over 7% is considered significant in boosted yields in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
When we use this process to enhance the vitality of the nutrients, which is not just nutrients, it's also probiotics that is good for the plants and protects them, is also good for soil biology, that instead of 20% more yield, with the same formula, just laser enhanced, there is 60% more yield. Instead of double the micronutrients compared to control, there is typically 5 times the micronutrients compared to
Wow,
control. So 5 times the iron, 5 times the zinc, more than 5 times the copper, for example. So it's creating a higher yield of high nutrient dense, high vibrational, rejuvenating, and health enhancing food.
amazing. Is that being utilized right now by farmers in certain countries, or?
We're developing that program. We're probably going to
Mm-hmm.
take some significant steps in that direction next year.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal will be just to make higher quality, nutritional, better tasting, longer shelf life food available. I mean, it's part of the process. I mean,
Yeah,
Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food.
absolutely. Food is
So
medicine.
that's a place to start.
Fabulous. And you mentioned, though, it's only for non-GMO, so it doesn't work for GMO
That's interesting.
plants.
We did 2 very large studies in Mexico, and a 10-acre study is considered adequate. The first one was 2,500 acres, and the second was 5,000 acres, so very large studies. And it also used corn, but it's hard to get non-GMO corn.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to change the yield increase from 25% more corn to 70% more corn, which actually increased to 100% more corn the second year. And the biggest difference was while we got more yield, the micronutrient density didn't go up as much. So I think that's a factor of the GMO-ness.
Right, right.
And I think if we can find some of the older strains of corn, would be much better going to non-GMO corn as a food security crop.
For sure. And just preserving seed banks for that very reason.
Yep.
This has been incredible, Dr. Todd. What is the best way for people to reach you to learn more about your work? I know we'll be putting those particular URLs that you mentioned into the show notes.
Mhm.
But is the best way maybe to go to drtoddo.com?
Uh, the landing page for people to get some cool free stuff
Mm-hmm.
is drtoddo.com/ageless.
Hmm.
Or I guess technically it's backslash, but the usual direction of the slash when you have
Yeah.
the subcategories of the page. So drtoddo.com /ageless. And there's a general report on stem cells to understand the stem cell world because it's much more complex than people
Hmm.
realize because different types of stem cells do different things. And I believe I've also made available the victory song, which was the finale song of our last choir, which is the song that a civilization sings when they move into unity consciousness. And listening to it or singing along with it now is a way to accelerate that becoming our future reality or
Hmm.
to bring that future more closer to us time.
Amazing, amazing. So many resources. My goodness. How do you have the time? I guess you just quantum physically created. I mean, it
uh,
has to be like, 10 of you. There's so many amazing, amazing avenues to keep going on.
well, thanks. It helps to become timeless.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think you have touched on that already, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And for general information that can direct people either for information about stem cells uh, and they're knowledgeable enough about the scope of my work to direct people to other areas of interest that I might have described would simply be info@keygenics.com.
info@keygenics.com.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so honored that, you're taking time out of your timelessness to come and ground and actually transmit this information on the show through to other people. And I'm so appreciative and grateful for that. And I wish you all success, all love in everything that you are being and doing, Dr. Todd.
Aw,
You're amazing.
well, that's a beautiful interview. One of my favorites to date because you really got into the heart of it in a wonderful way. So thank you.